If you can't have a child, we should consider divorce, Carter said bluntly. I froze for a moment, unsure of how to respond. Just as I was about to give him an answer, I decided to surprise him with something he didn't expect. Fine, I understand, I replied, trying to sound unaffected. I'm in my 30s, a stay-at-home wife living with Carter, my husband, who works at an office. Our relationship began when I worked at a food company. Over time, we exchanged words about different things, and I found myself drawn to the warmth of his occasional smiles. So, I decided to make the first move and tell him how I felt. When I confessed, though, Carter turned me down. I'm sorry, I appreciate your feelings, but I'm already with someone, he said. But fate had its own plans. A month later, Carter came to me, saying, I broke up with my girlfriend, I've been thinking about you, and I want to be with you. Apparently, my confession had stayed on his mind and led to his breakup. I felt guilty at first, thinking I had played a role in it, but Carter reassured me, saying, don't worry, it wasn't meant to last anyway. His kindness soothed me, and we began our journey together. After 3 years of being together, we married. At the time, Carter told me he wanted children after we were married and asked if I would stay at home to support him and our future family. I wasn't particularly attached to my job at a toxic company, so I agreed to quit and become a full-time homemaker. The adjustment was harder than I'd anticipated, but I didn't mind. Our life together was going smoothly, and I was happy. We even had the convenience of having Carter's family just a 10-minute walk away. At first, I worried about frequent visits and potential tension with his parents, but I was pleasantly surprised. They were kind and welcoming, always offering support and gentle guidance. Even though we didn't have children yet, they never complained. Instead, they often said, you mean more to us than a grandchild. We've only had boys in the family, and we always wanted a daughter. Please, let us pamper you like our own. I grew close to Carter's mother, Hazel, and trusted his father, Andrew. Though Andrew was quiet, he was dependable. But over time, things began to change. After a few years, their once warm attitudes shifted dramatically. Andrew became even more distant, and Hazel's transformation was so extreme that I started to wonder if this harsh version of her was the real one. To put it simply, if Hazel used to be at a +100, she was now at a -100. That's how cruel her behavior had become. She started visiting our home more often, especially when Carter wasn't around. She would pressure me relentlessly to give her a grandchild. According to her, it was my duty as a wife. Just a short while ago, she used to tell me, children are a gift from heaven, you don't need to rush, you'll get pregnant when the time is right. But now, her tone had completely flipped. She'd mention other families. The couple next door just had a baby. The family down the street is pregnant. What about you? No matter how much she pushed, nothing would change if Carter wasn't ready to have children. At the start of our marriage, Carter had expressed a strong desire for kids, but after a year, he lost all interest. Even when I tried to initiate intimacy, he rejected me, claiming he was too tired or that he didn't want to be interrupted while gaming. When I spoke to Hazel about it, she didn't seem to understand, and the pressure continued to mount. Unable to bear it any longer, I finally confided in Carter about the constant pressure I was under. His response was less than reassuring. We don't need to rush this, he muttered, clearly uninterested. Still, he agreed to try and spend more time together. But despite our efforts, getting pregnant remained elusive. Hazel's criticism never stopped. She blamed our inability to conceive on what she claimed was a lack of effort on our part. I began to wonder if the stress she caused was only making things harder. At my breaking point, we finally decided to pursue fertility treatments in the hopes of solving our struggles. But just when I thought relief was on the way, a new problem emerged. Carter started to pull away. Ever since we started the treatments, he'd retreat to his room after work, playing video games and avoiding me entirely. When I tried to talk, he ignored me. The distance between us grew, and I couldn't help but wonder if this was the beginning of something much worse. I could tolerate Carter's behavior for a while, but over time, it only worsened. He became increasingly irritable, snapping at me over small things, like the expenses related to my hobby, and unloading his work frustrations on me. Every time I tried to defend myself, he'd quickly lose his temper, reminding me of his role as the provider and accusing me of being a freeloader. No matter how many times I reminded him that I had quit my job to support his wishes, it didn't matter. One day, I discovered he had quit his own job without telling me. When I confronted him, his response was cold and dismissive. "It's none of your business." I felt a mix of disgust and helplessness. While I initially thought we could manage with unemployment benefits and savings for a while, the fact that he wasn't even trying to find a new job stressed me out immensely. With Carter at home all day, his routine consisted of gaming and occasional trips to the convenience store. Our face-to-face interactions became more frequent, but instead of bringing us closer, the constant togetherness only escalated our arguments. Slowly, we stopped talking altogether. I began to question the point of staying in this marriage. The bond we once had seemed to be unraveling, and I could no longer ignore the sinking feeling that our relationship might be reaching its breaking point. I started to think about leaving, about escaping the suffocating situation. Then, one day, tired of seeing Carter waste his days away playing video games like a child, I confronted him. "You're not a kid. Stop playing games all the time and start looking for a job," I said firmly. His response shocked me. "Oh, by the way, my mom says if we can't have a baby, we should get a divorce," he said, as if it were a casual remark. To my surprise, I felt a strange sense of gratitude toward Hazel, something I never expected. After all, I was pregnant. I had found out during a recent checkup, and I had planned to tell him that evening. But now, I realized it might be better not to say anything just yet. With newfound resolve, I simply replied, "Okay, I understand." I pulled out the divorce papers I had already filled out and handed them to him. He froze, clearly caught off guard. He hadn't expected me to agree to the divorce, let alone have the papers ready for him to sign. He stammered, looking as though he had no idea how to react. His usual confident demeanor vanished, replaced by confusion and hesitation. He was clearly taken aback, and after a few moments of silent discomfort, he reluctantly signed the papers, stealing glances at me as if searching for some sign that this wasn't actually happening. When we sat down to discuss the details of the divorce, the conversation quickly turned awkward. There wasn't much to divide, no large assets, no savings to split. Carter had often complained about my spending, but it was he who had the more reckless financial habits. While I stayed at home, he spent large amounts on gaming and other indulgences, draining his finances. We had no savings to speak of, and Carter began to realize just how little we had left. In a final, desperate attempt, he pointed to a savings account and said, "Let's divide this, too." "That account isn't part of the property division," I replied calmly. "It's my personal savings from before we got married. It doesn't count." His face drained of color as he tried to make a claim on the condo we were living in. "I should at least get the condo," he insisted. I smiled and shook my head. "The condo is in my name, and it's already been put up for sale. You can't stay here anymore. Please leave immediately." I paused before adding, "I've also been saving up for a new home. I thought this place would feel too small in the future." Carter stared at me in disbelief as I calmly asserted my independence. Saving money had always been a hobby of mine. Even before marrying Carter, when I had a steady job, I'd managed to save a substantial amount. I had used that money to purchase the condo during a time when my career was taking off. I had accumulated significant assets, and even if I sold the condo, I could afford to build a new house downtown. All of these assets had been acquired during my single years, making them exempt from the division. It seemed that Carter hadn't realized this. He had assumed he was entitled to half of everything. When he learned he wouldn't be sharing in any of my assets, his shock was palpable. The conversation dragged on, but he remained stunned, unable to come to terms with what was happening. With no more to discuss, the conversation ended abruptly. I filed for divorce at the city hall, and the process was smooth, finalizing without any complications. A few months later, I returned to my parents' home, where I received their unwavering support during the birth of my child. I delivered a healthy baby boy, whom I named Rowan, a name inspired by the Bible. Now, my days are filled with the joy of being with my son and my parents. I never told Carter about Rowan, fearing that Hazel's meddling would only intensify if she found out. Meanwhile, Carter, who was evicted from the condo, retreated to his parents' home, but he seemed to have become a recluse, deeply affected by how easily I had agreed to the divorce. When he did venture out, his appearance was often disheveled enough to attract the attention of law enforcement, making his situation look even more pitiful. Later, I learned that he had quit his job, citing interpersonal issues at work. Apparently, his attitude, especially toward female employees, had alienated many people, ultimately leading to his isolation. He had always appeared kind to me, but I now realized it had been a facade. 3 years later, I found work as the manager of a local craft store, a place I had become quite familiar with. The store owner, contemplating retirement, asked me if I wanted to take over. With my parents' help with childcare, I had the time and energy to take on the responsibility. It seemed like the perfect opportunity, and I accepted without hesitation. One day, while I was serving a regular customer, I received an unexpected visit from Hazel and Carter. Their flattery about the store felt insincere and irritated me. "What brings you here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Hazel mumbled something, then abruptly demanded, "Give my grandchild back to me." Clearly, she had learned of Rowan's birth and now seemed to think he should be her heir. "Why didn't you tell us you were pregnant?" Carter accused, his tone accusatory. I kept my silence, glaring at them. "I knew you would try to stop the divorce if you knew," I replied coldly. But Hazel was relentless. "Return my grandchild. He belongs with us. We spent 3 years together." Her words left me stunned. Just then, my parents entered the store, sensing the tension from a regular customer who had seen Rowan with them. Hazel immediately approached my son. "Oh, how cute. He looks just like Carter when he was little. Look, I'm your grandma," she said, kneeling down to him. I tried to intervene, but before I could, Rowan, with surprising confidence, said, "I only have one grandma," and hugged my mother tightly. My mother then politely asked Hazel to leave, but Carter, growing increasingly agitated, attempted to forcibly take Rowan from my parents, shouting, "Just give the kid to my mother." I stood between them, trying to protect Rowan, but I was no match for Carter's physical strength. He was moments away from grabbing my son when, out of nowhere, my father stepped in. With a swift, practiced motion, he executed a flawless shoulder throw, sending Carter flying through the air. I looked up in awe to see my father standing there, a skilled police officer who had once competed in national championships during his younger years. Carter, completely unaware of my father's abilities, could only stare, disoriented and in pain. My father looked at him coldly and said, "If you dare to bother my child or grandchild again, I will take whatever action is necessary. Do you understand?" He flashed his police badge at Hazel, who turned pale with fear. Without another word, they fled the store. I never found out what happened to them after that, and frankly, I didn't care to know. Years passed, and Rowan, inspired by my father's strength and courage, began to express his desire to become a police officer. "When I grow up, I want to be a police officer too, so I can protect you, Mom," he told me one day. Under my father's guidance, Rowan worked tirelessly, excelling in his studies and martial arts, becoming unbeatable among his peers. As a mother, all I want is to continue watching my son grow into a man I can be proud of. I'm grateful every day for the support and protection my father has provided, and I'm more than content in the life we've built, far away from the chaos of my past. Thank you for watching this video until the end. If you found the content relatable, please consider leaving a positive rating and a comment.